Welcome to the North Star podcast. Join Claire Daniels and Pete Mills as we talk about defining your purpose and finding your own North Star. We'll be talking about inspiring stories, career highlights, and celebrating Northern businesses. Thank you for being part of our journey. We hope you enjoy listening. Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of the North Star podcast. I'm Claire.
I'm Pete.
And do you know what? I really wanted to dive straight in this episode, but it's burning.
It's burning, isn't it?
So, in the past couple of episodes, we've been talking about happiness, purpose, kind of finding ourselves and finding those moments when we feel kind of true to ourselves and feel happy and feel successful. And do you know what? I got upset because I listened back and I never once mentioned my husband.
I know, he texted me after, he was devastated. Are you only joking?
Yeah, no, and it really got me thinking, you know, I'd like to talk about today about that, like the role of family in career and in business. And I think there's a lot to potentially unpick there. But also, it's quite nice being able to do the podcast and listen back and be able to do some personal reflection, because actually at the time we were, you know, I was using a specific example of like, I like to go for walks with my dog. It gives me like clarity. I feel free and all these things. And well, 50% of the time when I'm walking my dog, my husband is there. So he's absolutely part of that with me. And, you know, it goes without saying that my husband makes me really happy. And I think I'm one of these people that just really tries to keep everything separate, which is why I don't talk about it. And I think it's quite interesting seeing the different dynamic, because from the start, Pete, you've always said about family and the purpose, and you're so family orientated. You talk about that a lot in terms of your family's impact on your career and your life. And I guess what I think we should do today a little bit is kind of unpack the role of family in careers and stuff like that. And you mentioned to me just before we started filming about that you feel like some perspective you've had over the past few years has given you that.
Yeah, sure. And before we get into that, I just want to say that Paddy did watch it, Andrea hasn't. So what does that say?
He is my number one supporter, and actually, you know, without his support, I probably wouldn't be where I am. But, you know, I'm concerned that maybe I take that for granted by just getting on. But yeah, he's my number one supporter, and I am his.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I don't want people to see this soft, sensitive side to me. I'm hard, I'm strong, I don't need no man, you know.
Yeah. Do you know what it is though? What I love about doing this with you is that we don't have all the answers. We're sharing the journey as we go, and we do both reflect after we do these sessions. And I think we get feedback from people, some of the reviews, and I think that's what makes this authentic, is that we are just being completely transparent. The fact you chose to share that as we started off, and you know that's I think coming into that sort of how do we bring family into business and into careers and work is really challenging, and we don't have all the answers right. We're figuring it out. I've got a new challenge, and it's a wonderful thing, but as a dad now, and the pace of which I've been used to working at, I can't do that. You know, we want you to come to London. My conscience is going, unless I can bring her with me, I'm away for 2 days. I don't really want to do that. So I think it brings up lots of challenges, doesn't it?
It does, and it's so interesting you say that, because a member of my team's just returning from maternity leave, and seeing someone take on that like additional struggle. And I was actually talking about her to someone else, and they were saying the pressure they can see that person is under as a mum. And I'm like, but I'm not putting that pressure on them as the employer.
No.
But it's so interesting that it's then an added pressure you put on yourself of like, well, I still want to do a great job, but I now have this new full-time role that I'm also taking on as a parent. Obviously, for a mum or a dad, you know, and you saying there in terms of, you know, finding that balance of being a dad and what you do around your work life.
Absolutely, and we touched on this last time in terms of, you know, the you know, for a woman coming back to work, being a parent, you know, there's obviously the challenges around that, and there's a lot. It's funny actually. I'll share this really quick. I follow someone who used to work with me at my old agency. She's recently become a mum, and she posted this video, Instagram reel, TikTok. I'm trying to be cool. I don't have TikTok, but it was about basically a lady's journey through pregnancy, and it showed all the traumatic side of it, saying that men don't have to go through it. And I couldn't help myself. I sent a little joke back. I was like, you've perfectly illustrated very valid thing that happens. The other part of that video is a man not sharing anything because we don't want to share it. And I think that's something that you see. Why is there a big mental health problem with men in that age group? Because we're walking around with all of these worries and concerns and we don't choose to share it. So we can maybe unpick a bit of that today as well, because there's different motivations that are driving me. So, yeah.
And I guess it comes down to that, why do we think that's the case, and why do we think we are how we are? I mean, to share my story, and so a member of my team's recently completed a degree. She got a first, well done. And in her dissertation, she was looking at the role of technology on leadership. And she interviewed me as part of it. And one of her questions at the end was, do you think you can be born a leader? And I said no, because I think it's all about nurture. I don't think it's nature. I think it's to do with the environment you grow up in and all these different external factors. And so I look at, what was my environment that led me to where I am? And I actually still have, very supportive parents who've always pushed me to do my best, who've always believed in me. I've shared in the podcast before, I had a brother who passed away. He was also like my number one fan, really big supporter, as is my husband. So I'm so fortunate that all those immediate people around me have always been supporters of me from day one. Yeah. But then the piece around when I start questioning why family isn't the first thing I reference when I'm looking at that point of where I feel my true self or feel happy is, my parents split up when I was a teenager, and I'm from quite a small family anyway. And then the added thing, my brother passing away, I don't have a family unit. There isn't we have all the people that come together. I've got a mum and I've got a dad, and then they've got a few relatives each left who live across the country that I barely ever see. Yeah. So my family is now my husband, my dog, my cat, and my husband's family, they're great as well, and they've accepted me. But it is different, your in-laws, it's not the same as your own family. So I think all those things have contributed right up to the point of last month, me not mentioning my husband when I'm talking about things that make me happy, because whilst he makes me happy, I was trying to own the thing for myself. Because what has shaped me through all my experiences is my independence. And so I've been very set on being independent, having my own thing carved out, having my own career. And that is a result of all the things in my life. And then that's one of those things that independence, I think, has turned me into being a leader and someone who wanted to lead alone. Because, totally. As we've discussed in other episodes, I used to have a business partner, and then we parted ways. So it's not saying that that's good or bad. And clearly there's negatives to it, because there's someone that I love who I've totally taken for granted and ignored when, we're talking about those things that we do. But also I've done that as that gave me ownership of, this is a thing I'm going to throw myself into, from parents getting divorced, throw myself into my career, my studies first of all, and then my career.
Sure.
So I think that actually your family and your upbringing and all those things play a very pivotal part. I guess, what are your thoughts on that? Because the amount of times we've spoken about your mum and dad having fish and chip shop.
It was
and I'm not having a go about that, but it's interesting because you reference that so frequently. So what are those milestones through your upbringing and family life that you think have contributed to where you are today?
That's to hear you talk about that, and it's you've shared some really open things there. But as I've said about fish and chip shop, but my parents and grandparents were in partnership. So, and back in the 80s, showing my age, the business that they started off with was my grandparents' house with a fish and chip shop next to it with a door in between that was open.
Right.
So I was either in there with my grandparents or I was in there with mum and dad till till we sold that business when I was maybe 5 or 6, and then my dad bought another business where we weren't living in it or near it, but it was the family life. So, and my grandparents remained an important part of that, very central to it. I guess and maybe other people that have grown up in family businesses will feel that you kind of, it's like a flat structure. And talking about how maybe that leadership thing emerges, I think where I got the shock of my life was joining a law firm. People I know still work there. It's an amazing law firm, but I got the shock of my life because you're joining an autocratic structure, whereas I've been used to this flat thing, so I couldn't deal with being asked to do things. Like, well, you haven't quite said that in the right way, and it's like, well, I'm your boss, so, and so I think for me it was like probably being spoiled in that environment, which is we can all have a go at each other as a family, and the next minute, and to be honest, coming back to family stuff, I think my wife has probably struggled with that with me, because if we're having a debate or we've not agreed on something, she might think about it for a few days after, whereas for me, it's got in a moment, because in a family business that's kind of, you're hustling and bustling, and then you'll all be falling out one minute and you're all friends the next. But that leadership point is definitely, I think, my reaction to, I could just do this better myself, so why am I not? So it's driven by that, but of course, the family business had people and team members and everything else, and that's what you need to be successful as well. You need good people around you and to bring you on. So family has a massive impact on that.
And just one word that you mentioned there, so you used the word spoil. And I know you came from humble beginnings, but you're saying like spoil in like the upbringing and like the environment you were in. And that reminded me of something that I heard in a podcast that I listened to this morning, actually, and it was Daniel Pink on Stephen Bartlett's Diary of a CEO. And the podcast was about motivation, but actually they spoke about a lot of different things, and one of them being Daniel was referencing the birth lottery and saying, just the chances of being born the day you were born, and then being born in a good hospital with good facilities, having parents there, even the privilege of being white, being straight, all these things obviously now so prevalent when we're fighting for equality for so many different people. And there's never been a more hot topic of debate at the moment than kind of privilege. And I feel like that's getting spoken about a lot. And I would say up until recently, I've naively thought, even though I mean, look, to put it into context, at primary school I got bullied, but my nickname by the bullies was Rich Bitch. So I was bullied because we were the wealthiest family in the school, and people didn't like that. So, I've not come from a family of millionaires, but we were always well off. My dad worked really hard for that, and I've always thought, I've seen my dad work really hard for what he wants, therefore I've worked really hard, and that's where my drive comes from. But I've not until recently seen that I've probably have had an unfair advantage compared to others. And there's been a lot of this. Molly May was recently criticised when she went on the Diary of a CEO, because she said, look, we've all got the same 24 hours in a day, you've just got to go out and work hard, and everyone was like, she's privileged. And I disagreed. I was like, well, no, like she has gone out and worked hard, etc., etc. But then you start going, well, actually, no, look at the platform that she had to build upon.
And this is the point, Claire, isn't it? Because, and just to interject on that point, I think that it's really interesting you brought that example, brought Molly May up on there, because she was basically criticised for being successful. And actually, I think there is a warp. I think we're recorrecting in the way that we look at the world. That, funny enough, we're having this discussion yesterday at a round table. What's wrong with owning a restaurant or what's wrong with owning a fish and chip shop?
Yeah.
And that's what you do. Or what is wrong with wanting to scale a company? But it comes back to why we set this podcast up, which is what's the purpose of why you're doing that?
Yeah, exactly. We don't care if someone listens to this because they want to be an entrepreneur and grow a multi-million-pound tech company, or if they want to sit at home sewing tea cozy covers, like whatever it is. Like if that's what you want to do, great. Because it's about knowing what you want to do.
There's a lady who in our building in Salts Mill has an office, and it's just her. She does adjustments for suits and dresses and things like that. Her business is called Silly Wednesday, and she's always really happy. She comes in, she can hear her playing her music, she does a thing, and that's what she wants to do. Brilliant. She goes home at 5 o'clock or whenever, and she's really happy. And that's her purpose is just enjoying doing what she's doing. And I think that's coming back to like the family orientation and things like that. I think I've shared this before, but when we were growing up and back in the sort of 80s, with the way that hours work for takeaways, for example, you were often aligned with the pubs. People forget that now, that most people were out in pubs in the 80s, and so they would fall out at midnight and then they would go for the takeaway, right? So you needed to be open when the pubs closed. So my dad worked nights, and I can remember being stood at the window. We lived in Bradford, at the other side of Bradford, so we looked out onto the city with all of the lights of the city, and I used to try and think which light he was, because he wasn't at home. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like, I think that coming back to like the last episode and what triggered your thoughts on that, and why I'm probably maybe even over projecting it a little bit in terms of like really trying to assert myself to keep myself in check, is I don't want Marigold as much as possible looking out a window going, I wonder where Daddy is tonight because he's gone to London or he's whatever. And that, that's part of the course, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. And it's interesting, as you said earlier, like we do this podcast just because we want to share our own experiences. It's not about having the answers, but it's about always, we hope someone will listen and feel the same. And I think it's interesting, the dynamic we can provide as well, in that, I don't want kids. Like, I've never had a desire to have a family. And is that impacted, does my family upbringing play a role in that? And there's so many different things at play in terms of like, I've come from essentially a broken home, as dramatic as that sounds. Does that shape how I think and feel about things? And I just think it's really interesting, the amount of different things that can impact us that we're probably not aware of. And what I think you should be really proud of is you're already thinking about that role and impact on your daughter, which probably says a lot. We're going, does our family life play a role? But you're already going, I get up and we sit and have breakfast and I show them up the videos. She's not even one, guys. I don't know how many months old she is.
Like 9.5 months, and I've got to watch our YouTube
and you're like,
video.
I can't go to London. Yeah, she's going to remember me not being
there. It's mad. And on the flip side to you, I think one is what you're talking about is the choices you're choosing to make, and in 5 years' time, you may choose to do a different thing, right? Because it's your choice, and I think that's what we, in terms of setting this up and the purpose piece, is that we are aiming for something, but things do change as well, and it's been cool with that. I think it's certainly something that our upbringing has had an impact on who we are, and it's learning to be comfortable with that, I think, isn't it?
And do you know what, as well, I think it comes back to, because we've definitely spoken in other episodes about, like the culture now of everyone seeing overnight successes and wanting to be the next entrepreneur and whatever. But almost this check-in of, there's so many other factors. Even if it's someone you went to uni with, you did the same course, you got the same degree, and you came out, that's not enough to do, to be exactly the same. And you were saying that actually about an example of like Bill Gates or something.
So we were talking about that, weren't we, earlier, where going back to your postcode lottery example, and there is an element of saying, well, of course, so Pete's attracted to businesses because he grew up in a business environment. His parents were self-employed. You could put that and that's probably why, right? But equally, I didn't get anything from my parents in terms of here's a chunk of money to go start what you're going to do. It was all, obviously I had their support, but it was off my own back. So we use the Bill Gates example where he was allowed into the university to play around with the first mainframe that just happened to be in Seattle, but it didn't mean he was going to set up Microsoft. He met a crazy guy that could write computer code, and Bill was really clever at selling it. So there's happenstance and there's opportunity that I think collide and merge.
Yeah, and I think there's a mix of this circumstance that probably really helps set your path, but then also been listening to a lot of podcasts. Podcasts I listened to with Mo Gawdat, where he talks about, and it really resonated with me in the first few minutes of him talking, because actually he came from, I'm pretty sure his family were divorced as well. So he was like, you very quickly either follow the same path because it's what you've seen, or you go, I'm never gonna be that, and I'm never gonna let that happen. And I think, for example, we speak about him a lot, but obviously he is the number one podcast in the UK, Stephen Bartlett. So obviously we listen to him and see what he does. I feel he says a lot about this kind of broken home he came from. So he wanted to break out from that. And that's why he believes he's become an entrepreneur, because he wanted to carve his own way. Whereas you may get people, for example, who come from, not very good upbringing, not very good background, and then they just do the same, they sign on for benefits when they leave school. They follow same traits and paths as what they've known, and they never break out from that.
Absolutely.
I just think it's very interesting, because whilst all those things shape you, some of them shape you more towards something, and some of them shape you further away.
And I think talking about influencing on our behaviour growing up, and we went to school. I'm adding you on here now. You might skip this sort of mantra, but were you growing up in a Labour government at school? Was Labour in Tony Blair and the gang, right? Yeah. Education. And actually, the message I felt, and I've played this out with a lot of my pals now that were a bit older and wiser. The message I had at school was very much about, you need to do well at school, you need to get a degree, and then you get a good job.
Yeah.
Well, hang on, what if I don't want to go down that route? What if I want an apprenticeship? I know in myself that if there was the opportunity at the time of leaving school to work 4 days a week in a business and do a day of education, I would have probably gone for that option.
Yeah.
But at the time, my friends would have gone, oh, are you not good enough to have a degree and just do university? Or you need to go to university for an experience. And I think that's the impact that we're trying to rebalance now, which is, what is the other ways that you can go through life?
Yeah.
And we have been known as a nation of shopkeepers, but right now it's looked down on if you try and break the mold, or you're a failure if it doesn't quite work out, and all of this. So there's a lot there, I think, that has impacted why we're there too, and our family's hearing that message going, well, Claire needs to go to university because she'll get on more. But you'd have got on with, you brought up well, you've got your moral values, and you know what I mean?
It's interesting that mention of education, because I feel like the world of work and business has moved on, and it is being more open to people who work in different ways and different mindsets, and celebrates diversity more than the education system does. And I think, this it's a whole other thing altogether, but the education system has not changed. It's not moved with the times.
No,
the curriculum has not changed. The way we teach people has not changed. And actually, I don't think it's the be all and end all to what you're going to go on and become. And I've definitely said it to others when they're worried about like the degree results or whatever. Each stage of your education is just a stepping stone to the next. You just need your GCSEs to qualify for your A-levels. Then after that point, no one cares what your GCSEs are. at your A-levels, you just need them to, you know, if you're going to do a degree, you just need, and then once you've got a degree, you only really need that to get your first job.
That's right.
And then you're only ever as good as your last thing, you know, when you go on to get another job. Where did the last work and what was the last role?
Absolutely.
You know, I'm not looking at what degree did you get. I could not tell you in my team right now who has a degree and who doesn't, what their educations were, or anything like that, because it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. No, there's someone who works in the crisp business who didn't go to uni, and she's probably one of the most standout people I've ever worked with. You know, she's on a trajectory, and I know her family's played an important role in her life and continues to do so. But and I'm not naming you, but she knows who she is, and I think that I think it's being open about these things, isn't it, and these experiences, and one, not letting it hold you back if it's holding you back, and the other is being open-minded about, well, what are you trying to build and why are you doing it? Coming back to purpose, right? So we had very really sad, really well-known entrepreneur passed away a few weeks ago, and you know, he'd been poorly for a while, and at his funeral, he'd left a letter to his children, and he talked about what he'd done in his life was to build a platform for them. But just because but here's the point, just because he's got children, and I was talking about this morning with a friend of mine, it doesn't have to be about children. What's the platform that you are building to just have a better world that you live in, right? So it's not just about, I've got to build it for kids. I might be building it, like we do a lot of work with the Rainforest Trust. I probably get the most satisfaction in January from getting that certificate from the Rainforest Trust with a picture of a tiger on it saying you've saved 1,500 acres than anything do you know what I mean? And so I think, what is the platform that you are doing things, and what you're building for that, is it to, and I think that gives you a big sense of purpose as well. Yeah,
absolutely. And I couldn't agree more, and it's all about finding what that thing is that we talk about so often. And you know, I don't think it matters. I don't think you have to be able to, it's not like a company mission statement, what's your purpose, and you have to have it spot on and tailored and right, because it can change all the time.
Totally.
But it's understanding the reason to work towards knowing what your purpose is, and all those things that impact you. And you know, I would say a key takeaway for anyone listening to this episode is being able to self-reflect, because that's what you said to me, right, when I was telling you about how I felt listening to the last one, and we spoke about the difference from recording it to leaving to going back and listening to it, and you can already reflect and feel different about something.
Absolutely.
And you know, I'd really hope for anyone listening to this is like, give yourself that space to reflect and to listen to the things we've said as well, in terms of, well, why am I comparing myself to person B when my upbringing, my everything was completely different, but I'm constantly comparing myself. And actually, I've been through that in a business sense. You know, recently I was asked by an advisor to look at the competition and tell him what I admire about them, what they do differently. And you know, I was looking at some competition that's like better than us, you know, like bigger, turning more over, everything like that. And then I went to myself, I'm like, I'm looking at them go, why aren't we there yet? But I don't know the background of any of that. So they might have had millions of pounds worth of investment, whereas I'm doing it totally independently on our own. And so easy to look and just go, well, why aren't I there? But you've got no idea every single little thing that's gone into the contribution of that final outward thing that you see. So, you know, it's about not comparing, being able to just self-reflect, just compare yourself against your past self.
And it's really tough, right, isn't it? It's really tough to have that discipline, and it takes practice, and I think that we're all guilty of it from time to time. Why am I not there yet? You know, I've done it, something I was working on recently, and I was like, we should be further on, and then he takes that and go, why should we? Because you think that? And you know, the things that I do in my working life, there's a 3, 5, 7, 10 year view on everything, and some of it is 6, 7 years time we'll know if we've got something right, you know, on one or two of them. So what do? Do I predict the future, or do I just try and enjoy every day?
Exactly. And if you live your life like that, you know, what more could you hope for? And like I said, I actually think the power is in just compare yourself to your past self.
Yeah.
Am I doing better? Am I a better person? Am I in a better place? Just do that. Have I reflected? What could I have done differently? Yeah. And, I think that's what a lot of this conversation's been about. It's like looking back on the past and moving forward positively, rather than comparing to something outside of that and wondering where we are and what we should do next.
Absolutely. Well, I think, Claire, we've hit it pretty hard today. And do you feel better now that you've addressed that at the beginning?
I do. I love you, Paddy. No, I know that's daft, but it was nice to reflect and be like, don't take someone for granted. And, we probably all do that all the time in our lives.
Absolutely.
But I think it's really important, whoever those people are, to understand that support network that have led you to where you are today.
Totally.
And tap into that and keep using it.
Yeah.
But that is maybe a bit deep, but I hope everyone has enjoyed that episode. And please do go leave us a review, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts. Go on there, leave us a review. It really means a lot to us to know that you're listening, even if it's just to tell us more. Leave a comment on an episode, how it made you feel. We'd love to hear from you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the North Star podcast. To find out more about us and find more episodes, please visit thenorthstarpodcast.co.uk. Thank you for listening.